I'm at home today with multiple champion jockey Basil Marcus, who celebrated his 65th birthday earlier this month. So Basil, first of all, a belated happy birthday.
Thanks so much, Graham. Time has gone so quick, I don't know where it's gone.
Well, we're going to talk about time flying by in just a moment, but thanks for your time and thanks for welcoming me into your home.
Pleasure.
Obviously, the 2022 Cape Town Met is on the horizon, and we'll chat about that in greater detail a little later on. But what it does do is bring back all those memories of 40 years ago, in 1982, when you won the first of your Mets on Foveros. I bet you remember it as if it was yesterday.
Oh, Graham, riding a horse like Foveros, you never forgot him because he was still a colt when he won. And he had his first run in South Africa as a 5-year-old. And he just went on to do amazing things. So, a horse I'll never forget.
Tell us about Foveros. What kind of a horse was he? We know that he went also on to become champion sire in South Africa, so he wasn't just a great racehorse. He was a wonderful addition to our stallion ranks, and we remember him, as we were saying earlier, as if it were yesterday. I can't believe how long ago it was that you won the Met on Foveros. I was actually there that day, so we're aging ourselves here. Tell us about Foveros.
He was almost the perfect horse. Beautifully balanced, lovely length of rein, big strong middle and a huge hind quarter. And, the most difficult thing about riding him was actually getting him to the start because as he used to turn and canter around, he used to really kick up with his hind legs. And, I was always very cautious and ready for him. But, he was a very easy horse to ride in a race, but, just super horse to ride.
Now, you were associated with many, many top horses before you left our shores and went and plied your talents and trade overseas, and we'll get to the Hong Kong stint in a moment. But one name that jumps out at us is, of course, Model Man. Who came a little bit later than Foveros. But he was a supreme champion, and like Foveros, went on to make a huge impression as a stallion at stud. Tell us about Model Man.
Well, again, the big horses you ride, you don't really forget anything about them. But I must say, it was a huge training feat by Pat Lunn to keep that horse racing. And just interesting, when he ran in the Met, we actually flew down with him in the plane. They made a big stable for him, and both my wife and myself, and obviously Pat, we were all in the plane with him, and chatting to him along the way down to Cape Town. He won the Met that year. A couple of days later, and he beat Enchanted Garden. And then he flew back home. But, the Met looked very easy on him. I remember Felix and I were head and head for the last 300. But Model Man was actually quite a difficult horse to ride. He had multiple problems. He was shinny to start as a baby. Then he had different problems from joints, knees, back, everything. And that's why I say what a huge effort it was for Pat to have kept him as sound as he was. We used to canter him down to the start, keep trotting until you got in the starting stalls. He wasn't a horse that jumped out really well. He was a little bit sluggish, not good in a slow run race. So, not the easiest sort of horse to ride. There were a lot of expectations from him because he was a champion, but totally different to Foveros that you could place anywhere at any time. But both super horses. And
I'm not going to ask you the unfair question which was the better of the two, because that would be unfair. Foveros was, of course, trained by Herman Brown Sr.
Yes.
You had a great relationship with Herman Brown, and obviously, as you've mentioned, Model Man was trained by Pat Lyon. But let's wind the clock back a little bit,
Yeah.
because it all starts in the Apprentice Academy, of course. And you were the first apprentice to ever ride 100 winners in a season. And I, again, was at Milnerton on a certain day, way back on the 21st of June. I was barely 20 years old, so you were probably 18 years old.
Yeah.
Whereas an apprentice, you won 6 races of 8 at Milnerton. And the remarkable statistic around that was that all 6 were trained by Theo de Klerk, but more than that, 5 of your 6 winners were sired by the legendary stallion Persian Wonder.
Yeah.
What a day that was.
Oh, Graham, that was an amazing day. And, you know, riding for Theo de Klerk was a story in itself. He was a real English gentleman, and he was a major. And, you know, when I used to come back after a race meeting, even if we'd had a couple of winners, if he wasn't satisfied with the way I rode them, he'd call me into his office and say I was lucky that the horses were good enough. So,
Or that he trained them well enough.
Yeah, well, he always trained them well enough, but he was just an exceptional man. Trevor Botton was his assistant, and so again, he was leading train in the Cape, so there were high expectations. So I knew that I had to up my game all the time. The day that we had the 6 winners in one day, it was just an absolute heaven. I mean, these things don't happen. And just getting back to the 100 winners in a year, my 100th winner of that season was a horse called Loud and Clear, which was owned by a gentleman called Major Wyatt. So just brilliant time, lucky to be able to have joined him as an apprentice, and lucky for the success he gave me.
6-timers have happened sporadically throughout South African racing history, but as an apprentice that was a huge achievement. But then you went one better many years later, 7 of 9 at Greyville. That was on the 3rd of December 1986. And again, it's not a unique achievement. Others have ridden 7 winners in a card. Do you remember much about that glorious day at Greyville on the 3rd of December 1986?
Yeah, I do. And in the last race, I was riding a filly for Mr. Brown called Hunting Queen, and she was a perennial second placer, you know, 2nd or 3rd, but whenever she was favourite, she wouldn't win, and she was struggling to win her maiden race. And you know, it was going to be almost impossible for her to win. And in the jocks room, I said, "Can you imagine if this filly wins?" And we were all laughing, and it was nice that the jocks in the jocks room were pulling for me as well. And I came to the straight, and I was sitting 3rd, 4th, but I sat on her and sat on her and sat on her, and I thought, well, I'm not going to let her go till I really have to, you know, because if the 7's going to happen, I'm going to have to really excel. And she did get up to win. So that 7 in one day was, again, you know, these things don't happen.
Well, I stand to be corrected. I think that is a South African record, which I think was equalled by Jeff Lloyd, who also rode 7. Names that come to mind that have ridden 6 winners: MJ Odendaal, Garth Puller, and that list is certainly not exhaustive. I don't have the complete list in front of me. But what it amounts to, it's a fairly unique experience. I think Pierre Strader might also have ridden 6 winners, but it's not always that you're on a high. And sometimes things go pear-shaped on a race day or in a race. And many of our viewers may not even remember this, as they probably don't remember Major Michael Wyatt and they don't remember Theo de Klerk, but they were great personalities of the Western Cape racing at the time. But you were involved in an horrific accident at Greyville Racecourse, where I think 8 horses came down or something of that order. Probably one of the worst and most spectacular, if one can use that word, accidents in South African racing history, and you were quite seriously injured.
Yeah, it was a very it was a serious accident, and Jeff Lloyd was in front of me. I was actually riding the favourite, and I could see his saddle starting to slip. in those days, I mean, we've got elastic girth and surcingles now, but the first lot of elastic girth and surcingles that were made wasn't, they were looser, and after a bit of use they got looser, and if a horse was pulling in a race, they would sometimes slip, and Jeff was going extremely well, and for over 2 furlongs I could actually see what was happening, and we had horses on our outside, and you know, in those days the films weren't as good as they are now, and the guys didn't give an inch, and even though we were shouting, you know, for some space and for me to be able to pull out, you know, I was still locked in there. As we turned into the straight at Grable, Jeff's saddle went up further, he clipped heels, my horse didn't have a chance to miss him, and I went straight into him, and I fell sort of facing the field coming towards me, and the old skull caps, the chin straps were leather, and also what connected to the actual skull cap was all leather, and so now they've changed it, they're a lot more safer, it's a nylon and really fitted very well, but that was the skull cap at that time. That was the most modern skull cap and safest skull cap at that time. Anyway, my chin strap snapped, and I got kicked on the head by one of the horses behind me. There were horses scrambling everywhere and jockeys lying on the floor, and fortunately it was just Jeff, Lloyd and myself that were injured. So we were in the ambulance going to St. Augustine Hospital, and Jeff was crying, and I was there trying to tell him he'll be okay, and that's the last thing I remember. And then I went into hospital, and they put me into induced coma, and I was like that for a couple of days, and they weren't quite sure if I'd get through it. And cut a long story short, I did. I survived. It took quite a while for me to actually get my license back. The jockey club were a little bit wary because when I had the accident, I had a fit on the x-ray table, so I had to be on that medication, and the jockey club weren't sure if I was going to be able to cope coming back riding. I got letters from specialists and surgeons. And
so how long were you off?
I was off in total, I must have been close to 6 months. Wow. And but that wasn't my only fall that I'd had. At 21, I had a very, very bad fall at Maritzburg across the old road. Now there's a tunnel to get under the course, but the old road was about 200 meters after the winning post, and a horse did the splits in front of me. Again, I couldn't get out the way. 4 of us fell, and 2 other guys never ever rode again. And
it reminds us all, of course, it's a very dangerous sport, being a jockey, and we think more recently of that horrific accident in Hong Kong.
Absolutely.
That involved Zach Purton and Lyle Hewson, and when you watch that fall, you realize just how lucky both Zach Purton, Lyle Hewson, Karis Teeton, and the others involved were lucky to get away with that. But let's fast forward then to Hong Kong, where you were multiple champion jockey, before eventually the injuries caught up with you and you were forced to retire. But you were, how many times were you champion jockey of Hong Kong?
I was there for 10 full years. I did 2 additional stints my 11th and 12th year, but the 10 full years I was champion 7 times, second twice, and fourth once. So,
because you never were champion jockey of South Africa, you were champion apprentice, never actually champion jockey of South Africa, am I correct?
100%. Jeff Lloyd beat me by 1 winner the 1 year, and it was never really my priority to be champion jockey, because I was always very competitive against myself. And when I joined Herman Brown from the age of 20 until I actually went overseas at the age of 33, we didn't have the luxury of the work riders that we've got now. So it was the jockeys that had to ride work.
And also in those days, I mean, it was not uncommon on a Saturday for there to be 3 race meetings: Johannesburg, KwaZulu-Natal, and the Western Cape. And the jockeys travelling around the country was not a common phenomenon. I mean, you basically stayed at home unless you were going for the feature race season.
Yeah, and also Herman Brown was very firm on me not travelling a lot and being there to ride the horses' work. I mean, we had a real good string. The way I measured my success was if I could be provincial champion, and I was that in Cape Town, and I was that in Natal many times. So
and of course, champion jockey of Hong Kong 7 times.
Yeah.
Given the fact that Barty Leisha was the forerunner to a South African presence amongst the riding ranks in Hong Kong, if I may put it that way, you picked up the baton and you ran with it. Obviously, beyond your era came Dougie White, and he was multiple champions jockey of Hong Kong. So for a long while, South Africans dominated the Hong Kong Jockey Championship.
Sure.
But eventually, as I said, those injuries caught up with you, and after, as you said, 12 years of riding in Hong Kong, which was 7 championships, 2 runner-up berths, you were kind of forced to retire through injuries, all those injuries. Today, as we sit here today, I know that you've had knee replacements and hip replacements, and but yet you're as fit as a fiddle.
Yeah, very fortunately, I'm very fit. I had many falls, probably more than my fair share. I fractured 2 vertebrae, T2 and T3. I was in traction for 6 weeks. The other falls that I had, but in Hong Kong I also had a couple of falls, fortunately not as bad as South Africa, but they all affected my knee. And first I had the meniscus operation, then my ACL went, and I think I hit it very well, but from the age of 35 to 45, my knee was either lock-in, or when I jumped off the horses, it would just give. So, and I was riding at the top level for those 10 years with a knee that really wasn't very good. So I was just grateful that I could keep riding and keep being successful, and it just, now that it's all over, it made me realize how tough I had to be and disciplined on myself to actually have achieved that. So I'm proud of that.
Absolutely. And, obviously, I think you were probably around 45, am I correct, when you were forced to retire from the saddle?
Yes.
And you very quickly made up your mind you wanted to stay within the game, become a trainer.
Yeah.
And, when you think back on the horses that you were so successful and associated with as a jockey, we've mentioned Foveros, Model Man, but there are a host of others. Time doesn't allow us to go into all of those. Then as a trainer, in your very early years as a trainer, to come across a horse like JPEG and become the trainer of JPEG, who still today as a 3-year-old holds the record of being the only horse to win the 4 classic graded races in the Western Cape, and we know what he went on to do on the international stage and that memorable victory in Dubai with Anton and the saddle slipping sideways. I mean,
Absolutely.
that was arguably one of the most spectacular rides I've ever seen. But I'm going to ask you, how did JPEG compare to Foveros and Model Man?
He was quite different. He was he was always an athletic horse. He reminded me of a very good horse that I rode in Hong Kong called River Verdant, who was also the year 3 years in a row. And he was a light-framed horse when I bought him, but he had the most terrific walk. And I thought, this is also like.
That was a great spot because he didn't have a commercial pedigree.
No, he didn't have a commercial pedigree. And at that time, I was a little bit concerned that he didn't have the best pastons. That was my only, as a newbie buying horses, I'd go back and say, am I doing the right thing? And I went back and watched this horse walk again and again. I thought, you know what? come what may, if the people that had asked me to buy the horse, which was Marsh Shirtliff, Etienne Braun, Paul Looms, and my brother Selwyn. And I thought, if they don't want the horse, then I'll keep him myself. Well, it would have been nice if I could have kept him myself, but as history says,
you shared the joy.
I shared.
And what a day it was when Anton rode into victory in a Group 1. Jockey was a Marcus, the trainer was a Marcus, and part owners were Marcus and Marcus.
Absolutely.
It was a great family affair. But
Absolutely.
obviously, then you went to Singapore, you came back, and we're going to fast forward a little bit again, because the time came for you to take a back seat, to hand over the reins to Adam, your son, to take over the Marcus Racing stables. You must be as proud as punch that in a relatively short career with limited opportunities, he's already trained 2 Grade 1 winners, Vardy winning, of course, the Lawrence Queen's Plate, Mississippi Burning winning the Western Cape Fillies Guineas, and then, of course, Princess Keller is in that mix as well. Although she's never won a Group 1 race, she's been oh so close. You must be very proud of what Adam's achieved in a short space of time.
Graham, I'm exceptionally happy and delighted. And I would say I'm probably most delighted with Adam's work ethic. You know, I became a trainer. Obviously, I wanted to remain with horses, but it was always in my mind. Both my children, Glenn and Adam, loved watching me ride. They loved horses, they loved racing, and it was always my intention that one day one of my children would take over from me, and that was the real idea behind it all. And you know, Glenn has gone on to be in racing, but on another side. And when Adam finished school, in fact, before he finished school, he used to be at the stables every afternoon. Had to make a few excuses why he wasn't at school on race days, but yeah, his work ethics is very good. And you know, he's only turning 33 this year, so to have won a couple of Group 1 races already. I'm really proud of him.
Well, Saturday the 29th sees the 2022 running of the Cape Town Met. It's had various names, obviously over the decades, presented this year by World Sports Betting. And talking about Adam, he's well represented on the day. Princess Keller goes for the Majorca Stakes. Bereave, who seems to be a fast improving sort, goes for the Cape Flying Championship. At first glance, maybe seems a little out of his depth at this early stage of his career, but certainly if you look at some of the form lines with Mr. Cobbs, as against Real Gone Kid, he comes into the race with a bit of a chance. And then in a very exciting 3-year-old, the half-brother to Vardy Universal in the Politician Stakes. He was badly interfered with in the Guineas. We'll put that behind us. So let's start off with Universal. Obviously expecting him to be very competitive in the Politician Stakes.
Yeah, we've been fortunate to get the draw 1, which is a big plus for him. You know, he's a quickly improving horse, getting stronger and stronger all the time. I think he will run a very good race in the Politician, and obviously that's the lead up to the Derby. So there's a few horses carrying slightly lighter weight. And
well, Pakaya obviously got his penalty after the Lawrence Queen's Plate, but the weights have been finalised beforehand.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's a good test for Universal.
So it's a good test for Universal, and if he can be in the mix there, then he'll be a big runner in this year's Derby.
Bereave in the Cape Flying Championship, as I said a moment ago, slightly under the radar, but excellent form. There is a line of form with Mr. Cobbs that suggests there's not a hell of a lot between him and Real Gone Kid. Weather is, of course, in that class. Only the race will show. But what do you make of Bereave?
I would have loved it to have been 1100. The 1000 may just be a little bit quick for him. But he's also does finish the race off very well. He's an improving horse, and he's getting stronger and stronger. He's a 4-year-old now, but he's taken a bit of time to get really strong. Never run a bad race, which is fantastic. I think it's competitive. You know, you've got older horses like Rio Carrari, the young gun, which is Real Gone Kid, and then a couple of good fillies. Filly called Hello Winter Hello. which before she was sold was actually trained by Adam. So I think Bereeve's going to be flying at them at the finish. Whether he gets there quick enough, we're hoping. We're hoping for a strong southeaster on the day.
Obviously, the weather conditions could play a hand in the outcome
absolutely.
of that Cape Flying Championship, because if they're running into a strong southeaster, it does alter the complexion of the race. It makes it tougher for front runners like Real Gone Kid and Bohica.
Yeah.
Princess Keller certainly deserves to win a Grade 1. She's played the bridesmaid to Captain's Ransom so many occasions in the Paddock Stakes recently. Although fourth, she was only 3/4 of a length behind Captain's Ransom, which is kind of her level of form. Now, Captain's Ransom's got the worst of the draw to overcome in the Majorca Stakes. Princess Keller's drawn a little bit towards her inside. But what you see is what you get, and you just got to hope for the best, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, she's an absolutely gorgeous filly. She deserves to be a Group 1 winner. She got beaten a short head by Zarina in the Garden Province in the Durban season. And she just is as genuine as the day is long. She really does deserve. She's run Captain Ransom to close distance, and I think all she has to do is improve just that touch more, and
or have a little bit of luck in running. Of course, Zarina's back in the race, and she's in good form, and she's probably a little bit fresher. Princess Keller's having her third run up to the rest, whereas Captain's Ransom's had 3 runs. Whatever the outcome, certainly it promises to be a terrific race between Captain's Ransom, Princess Keller, Zarina, and of course the younger Chansonnet, who ran out of his skin in the Paddock Stakes. Let's move on to the Cape Town Met, and I want to go back to Foveros and Model Man, because as we mentioned earlier, they're both end tires. Foveros, 40 years ago, with you aboard, achieved the Queen's Plate Met double. Jet Dark will be looking to do exactly the same this year, 40 years after you achieved the feat with Foveros. And Jet Dark is also still an end tire. Generally speaking, dealing with racehorses that are still end tires, like Foveros, Model Man, obviously you don't work closely with Jet Dark, but in general sense, is it quite significantly more difficult than dealing with a gelding?
Well, when a colt gets a little bit older, then they start, they can hemoconcentrate, they can misbehave a little bit as well. But both Model Man and Foveros were really on their game come Met time. So I don't think it's going to worry Jet Dark at all.
You must have been blown away with these Lawrence Queen's Plate victories.
Well, I think his win last year in the Queen's Plate was sensational. I wasn't surprised to see him come back and win a very good race, the Champion Cup in Durban. But when he won the Queen's Plate this easy, it was sensational. So, and the 2,000 meters at Kenilworth shouldn't worry him at all. I know Justin has said that already. But just from an outsider's point of view, I don't think that'll worry him at all. I think it's an exceptionally exciting race this year. I know it might be a small field, but sometimes the smaller fields for these Group 1 races are actually better, because then you get a truer result. But for me, Comedy Dung has had a terrific prep. His 2 runs, he's been drawn badly in both his 2 runs. He's drawn 1 this time. And the horse is looking terrific. I think from Jet Dark's last run, I mean, he could blow them all out, because he's just terrific. So he's going to definitely be in the mix. I think that there's a 3-year-old in the race, and
double superlative,
and he won the Guineas.
Will Anton get down to 54? No, scrap the question. I won't put you on that spot.
No, but my betting is that he will. Yeah, because he's ridden lights in the July a couple of times. He's always done the weight, so I think he will be there. So I think it's going to be a very exciting race. If you take the 3-year-old form Bakaya only got beaten 3.5 lengths in the Queen's Plate, you know, he's the line that you try and
that
take
brings
with,
double superlative into the
brings
race,
double
because when winning
superlative.
the Guineas, double superlative beat Bakaya by 6 lengths or there
Yes.
or thereabouts.
Yes.
It is going to be an intriguing race. Smallish field, same as last year.
Yeah.
Not overly small. 11 runners in a weight for age Group 1 race over 2,000 meters is more than adequate.
Absolutely.
I think the pace will be reasonable. We've got Rocking Ringo, we've got Puerto Manzano, and we've got Cirillo to ensure maybe not a ridiculously fast gallop, but certainly a sensible pace up front, which will be to the liking of Jet Dark, Comedy Ding, Linebacker. They will all appreciate a nice solid gallop. Nobody wants to see the Cape Town Met presented by World Sports Betting reduced to the Cape Crawl, but I think the Cape Crawl has kind of disappeared a little bit. I think races have been run more genuinely in recent times. So Jet Dark, is it fair to say you believe he's the horse to beat?
I think Comedy Ding, for me, is the horse to beat. I think Double Superlative is going to really be running at him, and Jet Dark, he's going to be flying. His draw won't matter to him at all, because he can make up a lot of ground from behind. So I see those three fighting it out.
Basil, thanks again for your time. Once again, a belated happy 65th birthday.
Thank you.
Enjoy Met Day, and hopefully one of Princess Keller, Bereave or Universal, or all three come through to fly the flag for the family, and to present Adam with the possibility of adding to his CV of 2 Grade 1 victories to date. Thanks very much for your time.
My pleasure. Thanks, Graham.